chapter 2, beginning in verse 11. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the day that you've given to us, and a beautiful sunshiny day. We thank you for all of the moms in the room and the gift of motherhood that you give as an expression of your own love and your own heart toward us. And we ask, Lord, that you would bless our time together and that you would encourage us in the study of your word today. In Jesus' name, amen. Verse 11, chapter 2. One day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together, and he said to the man in the wrong, "Why do you strike your companion?" He answered, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely the thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father, Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." All right, so in this section, we started into this section last week, and I started by drawing your attention to the fact that we have here 3 accounts of Moses intervening on behalf of a person or people who are being oppressed and exploited. So we looked at the first account last week when Moses goes out as he is probably, the text doesn't say it directly, but the suggestion is that as Moses grew, he begins to identify with his people. Incidentally, Dan Muller made a good point after class last week. I was talking about the fact that, as a member of Pharaoh's palace, Jews and Egyptians look very similar, that Pharaoh's daughter could have passed him off as an Egyptian and he never would have known he was a Jew. And I still think that holds true, but Dan made a good point. Yes, they do look similar, but Jews are circumcised. And so there would have been a distinguishing mark that would have been unavoidable to notice. But Moses, as he grows, he begins to identify with his people. And notice in verse 11, it says that twice. He went out to his people, and then he noticed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people, which really emphasizes that Moses is concerned about them. And so he responds by killing the Egyptian. And we started into the next section, and if you're following in your notes, we're about halfway down on page 32, where the next day Moses goes out and he sees two Hebrews who are fighting and struggling together, and he intervenes again on behalf of the underdog, on behalf of the person who is being mistreated and exploited. And he says to him, why do you strike your companion? In other words, why are you doing this? Why are you hurting this person? And the guy answers and says, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptians? So last week we talked about, Moses certainly, was he justified in killing the Egyptian because he was he knew he was disobeying the law, but that doesn't mean that his actions were wrong in protecting someone whose life was at stake and was about to be killed by the Egyptian. But in this case now, he realizes that even though he tried to conceal what he had done, that word had gotten out, and we talked about how that might happen, and that the Hebrew people who Moses was trying to help, why they would have seen his help as not very helpful, right? Because more than likely the slave master would be missed. Of course he would be missed. And they would be blamed, and the wrath of Pharaoh would come down on them. And so Moses realizes that he needs to flee. But I want to zero in for a little bit on what the guy says to Moses at the beginning. He says, who made you a prince and a judge over us, in verse 14. And I want to take you to Acts chapter 7. Because Stephen, in his speech, remember that Stephen gives a speech in public regarding the persecution that the Jewish people or the Christians are under in Jerusalem. And he goes through a long history of Israel to explain and to highlight Israel's rebellion against God. And he brings up this very incident if we start reading in verse 23 of chapter 7. All right, got to find it. I was in chapter 8. All right, so Stephen says this. When he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them being wronged, he defended the oppressed man and avenged him by striking down the Egyptian. He supposed that his brothers would understand that God was giving them salvation by his hand. And on the following day he appeared to them as they were quarreling and tried to reconcile them, saying, Men, you are brothers. Why do you wrong each other? But the man who was wronging his neighbor thrust him aside, saying, Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday? At this retort, Moses fled and became an exile in the land of Midian, where he became the father of 2 sons. Why do you think Stephen brought that up in this speech? We probably know, we can be reasonably confident that as he is about to die, right, And maybe not. He realized how close he was to being killed. I doubt that his purpose was to give them, to just do a history lesson. Yeah, Linda?
Is he trying to get them to realize that in their past history, many times they have misunderstood the people that God was trying to use to explain something to them or teach them something? Or
Sure. Yeah, I think that's it. Notice what he says. Let's see here. Verse 25. Yeah, he supposed that his brothers would understand that God was giving them salvation by his hand. Moses thought they would understand, but they didn't. They didn't perceive it that way. And as Stephen is going through this speech, he points out several, as Linda said, several situations where God sends a deliverer to the people of Israel and they reject him, which is, of course, leading up to the ultimate deliverance that God had sent, Jesus, and that the people had rejected Jesus just as they had rejected Moses in the Old Testament. So notice verse 35. This Moses, whom they rejected, saying, "Who made you a ruler and a judge?" This man God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. This man led them out, performing wonders and signs in Egypt and at the Red Sea and in the wilderness for 40 years. This is the Moses who said to the Israelites, "God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers." This is the one who was in the congregation in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him at Mount Sinai and with our fathers. He received living oracles to give to us. Our fathers refused to obey him, but thrust him aside, and in their hearts they turned to Egypt, saying to Aaron, "Make for us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses, who led us out from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So, do you see the point that Stephen is making? And it's interesting that Stephen sees the whole history of the relationship between the people and Moses as one of rejection. Why do you think he would portray it that way?
Because he sees himself being rejected and about to be killed.
He sees, well, yes, but it's not himself that he sees as rejected. It's Jesus that's been rejected.
He said multiple cases.
Right, and he's going to be one in a long line, right? Jesus as he approaches Jerusalem. I mentioned this in the men's group yesterday. As he approaches Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets, do not know that a deliverer has been sent to you," right? And so Moses is perhaps the first deliverer, and another example of how Moses is living out in his own experience the life of Christ and the rejection that Christ would experience. And Stephen makes that connection. And it's not just here. This is just a foretaste of the rejection that Moses would experience at the hand of the people of Israel. What are some other examples? How is this just a foretaste of that rejection? Yeah.
Mount Sinai, got the Ten Commandments, and came back, and they had the golden calf.
Right. They had already, he's gone for 40 days, after everything that had happened, right? And they had said, we will follow this God, we will covenant with this God, but in such a short time they've already turned away to another God. And when they say, it's interesting, Stephen quotes that passage from Exodus when they say, as for this Moses, we don't know what's become of him. They're essentially saying, as for Moses and his God, we don't know what has become of them. Which reflects what?
Their lack of faith.
Their lack of faith.
And their understanding.
Lack of understanding of who God is. A pagan mindset, right? They have a pagan mindset. The gods are fickle. The gods may show up and they may, bounce around and make a good show for a while, and then they get bored and they go off and they do something else. And so it shows how deeply steeped in Egyptian polytheism they had become by the time they are being led out of Egypt. So that's one example, the golden calf. Any others you can think of? Yeah.
They complained because they were in slavery, and Moses let them out, and God, did it very triumphantly and miraculously, and within a short amount of time, they complained about what they got to eat and wished they were back in slavery so they could have cucumbers and garlic.
Right, exactly. And actually that happens on several occasions. And on several occasions they say to Moses, why did you bring us into this desert to die? Moses is delivering them, but they perceive what he is doing as bringing them into the desert to die. Okay, as God's representative. Moses isn't the one delivering them, but they perceive him, right? He's the spokesperson. And so I should have done a study to find out how many times they say that through the book of Exodus, and I think they do it in Numbers as well, right? But numerous times they say the same thing. Why did you? And I think they do it again when they get to the promised land. And the spies come back, right? Remember, 2 of them with a good report and 10 with a bad report, and it's the same thing. Why did you bring us here to be slaughtered by the people of Canaan, right? And so Moses is experiencing in this first encounter with his people the rejection that he is going to face throughout his entire ministry among them. So, the text goes on to say that Pharaoh heard of what had happened, and he determined to kill Moses. Whether it's the same Pharaoh or whether, Moses' adopted grandfather, who would have been Pharaoh's daughter's father, right? Maybe he had died. Moses is now 40. At least Stephen says he's 40. So a significant amount of time has gone by. One of the interesting things is that during that period of time, the average age of the average length of a reign for a pharaoh was 30 years. So it's very likely that this would be a new pharaoh, right? So Moses flees because Pharaoh is after his life, and he ends up in Midian. Midian, at least the region that the Midianites occupied, was predominantly in the Sinai Peninsula. So remember the two, that doesn't work. The 2 fingers of the Red Sea that come up, and here's Egypt, and here is Palestine, And this is the Sinai Peninsula, and this is where likely Moses, although there's some people put Mount Sinai around here, some people put it around here, and some people put it on the opposite side. This is called the Gulf of Aqaba. They put it on the opposite side. But this is the region where Moses lived for the next 40 years of his life with the Midianites. And it's a desolate place. It's a desert, okay? The Midianites, I don't remember if I mentioned this last week, but the Midianites were also descended from Abraham through his wife Keturah. And so they were extended family, so to speak, okay? And that may be why Moses went there, because he was hoping that their common kinship would dispose them to give him a welcome. And as we get to the end of that section, it just says, verse 15, the second part, Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. It's like, well, what am I going to do now, right? Doesn't really seem to have a sense of direction or a plan for what he's going to do, which of course sets us up for the third encounter, which ends up being God's provision for him for the next 40 years, although he doesn't quite see it that way. So the third encounter begins in verse 16. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. So we have more women who come into the story, and it is through these women. Notice all along what the women provide is they provide deliverance. They provide protection against a threat. Okay, so the midwives provide protection against Pharaoh's command that all the boys should be killed by them as they are being born. That's the first. Pharaoh's daughter provides protection against the new edict, which is that everybody should throw Egyptian boys into the Nile when they're born, okay? And instead of throwing him into the Nile, she takes him out of the Nile, okay? And provides protection. And these women also are going to provide for protection as Moses lives the next 40 years of his life as a fugitive, running from the most wanted poster that's been posted in Pharaoh's palace, right? Egypt's most wanted. And they're going to provide that protection. But notice, the story begins, they're the ones that need deliverance. So they come to the well. Moses is sitting there. Probably, notice what they tell their father in verse 19. They say, an Egyptian delivered us. So Moses is probably dressed in his Egyptian clothing, and they recognize him as an Egyptian. As far as they could tell, he's an Egyptian, and probably, Moses grew up in the palace, so his clothing was probably pretty distinctive. He sits down by the well. These women come and they start watering their flock, and shepherds come and chase them away. So what's going on there?
Again, those people again, associated with people.
Yeah, well, the first thing that's happening is that women are being mistreated, right? Because they don't have the physical strength to stand up to the shepherds push them aside, and they make them wait while they water their flock. And how many flocks and how many shepherds are there? We don't know. What it tells us, it gives us, you can kind of get a picture in your mind that late in the day, as the flocks are moving back as they're moving their flocks back toward their individual encampments, right? They're in the desert, they're nomads, so they're not living in villages, they're living in encampments, and they take the flocks out to find green pasture, right? And you may have to go quite a ways because yesterday they ate closer to home and that's all gone. So now we have to go further, right? But now we bring the flocks back near the encampment until tomorrow when we take them out to find a different place. But as we bring them back, we're bringing them to the well because they need water. And this is a desert, so they're not going to be drinking from the idyllic streams and springs that are all over Scotland and Ireland where we see sheep, right? It's a very different environment, okay? But the other shepherds come and basically push them out of the way until they're done, and who knows how long they have to wait. But notice what their father says in verse 18. When they came home to their father, well, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today?" So what's the implication?
He thought they should have been home.
Yeah, he thought they shouldn't have been home. Why? Because this happened every day. It was an ongoing situation. And it may be that the girls tried to get there soon enough to get done before the other shepherds showed up, because they knew that as soon as the other shepherds came, they were out of luck. And they would get pushed aside and have to wait. Okay? So they are experiencing ongoing abuse and mistreatment. It's an ongoing situation. And imagine Moses, he's sitting at the well, perhaps sitting off to the side, probably not sitting on the edge of the well, but sitting there near it, and he witnesses what's happening. And of course, for the third time, he intervenes. And he chases the shepherds away. What are some things that we can, some insights we can gain into Moses' character from just a brief description of that part of it, of that event? Yeah.
A strong sense of right and wrong.
He's got a strong sense of what's right and wrong, a strong sense of justice. That's the first one. Good. Anything else, Denise?
He's a rescuer.
He's a rescuer. He sees that he can do something. If he can do something, he will do something. Yeah.
Without regard to the consequences for himself, I would say on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of courage there for one guy to stand up against who knows how many shepherds, right? Probably he was confident in his ability that he could take these guys. Of course, he probably, as part of being in Pharaoh's court, learned how to fight as well as learned mathematics and all the other things. Yeah.
And the Egyptian, would they have maybe been afraid of him at all? Thinking he had power to come back?
Maybe. It's possible also that they would have been prejudiced against him. Like, what's this lone Egyptian doing, right, in our territory? And it might have made them even more aggressive toward him. So it's maybe 6 of one, maybe half and half there. Yeah. Ed?
It seems kind of I'm wondering, maybe he was dressed in a princely robes, and they thought he was an Egyptian prince, and they'd be afraid of that, if that would be possible. But how does one man chase away, who knows, 3, 4, 5, 10 shepherds? How does that happen?
Well, it's hard to say. It doesn't seem, when the girls report the incident, they just say he was an Egyptian, right? They don't say anything about him being a prince or anything like that. So it's hard to say, you know. What the text, I think, wants to convey is that Moses is a formidable guy. Right? That he has both the confidence and the courage and the ability to follow through. There are people that have confidence but don't have the ability to make good on their own confidence in themselves, right? But he clearly did. Yeah. Yeah.
The other question I had is, we picture the Sinai Peninsula as all desert, with a few oases. Where are all these sheep feeding from? How can they find grass in a sandy desert, you know, except for the oases, which are far apart and very small or whatever?
Yeah.
Any ideas about that?
Well, it's desert, but it's a scrub desert. It's not sand like the Sahara. Okay, it's a wilderness, and so they're eating scrub. They're not eating grass. They're eating scrub. And the well creates an oasis but you can't, you know, obviously there's numerous shepherds occupying the region and using individual oases, and you can't leave your sheep there because they'll just eat the grass and that'll become a desert too, right? And so that's why they were nomadic. If you think about nomadic tribes that still exist in Africa, for example, and in places in the Middle East, it is the fact that it's a wilderness or a desert that requires them to be nomadic, right? Because they're constantly having to move to find fresh grazing for their flocks. Okay? Another thing this tells us about Moses is that there's a difference now. He's not just standing up for his own countrymen. He's standing up for people he doesn't know and doesn't really have any obligation to. And so he is a man of principle. He is standing up on the basis of principle rather than on the basis of family connection or obligation. Does that make sense? And we also find, as we move through the story, that he is standing up because without any expectation that he is going to be rewarded for what he does. The girls just go home, right? Which is also a bit of an odd situation as well, right? The girls go home, they leave him there, they don't offer him any hospitality, and the father actually is the one who says, "Why did you leave him? Why didn't you offer him some hospitality? Why didn't you come bring him?" Okay, so they go home, they report to their father. Interestingly, here their father is called Reuel. Anybody know what other name he's called by? Jethro. Throughout the majority of Exodus, he is called Jethro, and it could be that Reuel, he's a priest of Midian. What does that say?
That he's a spiritual leader.
He's a spiritual leader.
Descendant of Abraham.
He's a descendant of Abraham.
He knows God. And later on in the Exodus, he knows God. He went to see the Moses.
Yeah, it's interesting because there is some ambiguity here. The Midianites were pagans. And And he's a priest. He's a pagan priest. But there's this, seemingly this vestige of Abraham and Abraham's God that he remembers, even though he's outside the promise. Right? And we'll see as we move forward that after the people are delivered from Egypt, Jethro comes and meets them in the desert. And the description is of Jethro adopting Yahweh as his God. He makes sacrifices, and he to Yahweh. And so there is a sense that here's a man who doesn't know the true and living God yet, and yet he is disposed toward what is right and true. And he does what is right in this situation, and ultimately he becomes part of the people of God. Okay? So he tells his daughters, go and bring him back. So they do, and it just is, it's pretty simple what the text says. Moses was content, verse 21, Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. So one of the 7 girls Moses marries, and that's pretty much all it says. Okay? Verse 22, she gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom. For he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. The name Gershom comes from 2 words, ger, which means alien, and sam, which means there, an alien there. So why do you think Moses would name his son this, and what does it say in the larger context, do you think, of the text and what's happening?
I think, to me, it says that Moses does not feel like this is his permanent home.
Mm-hmm. Right. Moses is an alien. I'm an alien here. So where does he think his home is? Egypt is his home. Right. But he has two significant things have happened at this point in his life. First of all, he's already been rejected by his own people. And secondly, he has been chased out of Egypt as a fugitive. He's in exile. He's essentially alienated himself from his people. His attempt to help them has resulted in being alienated from them. And secondly, he is now living in exile. And so he lives 40 years in the desert. How does that relate to the bigger story and the bigger picture?
Well, the wonder picture, he got aged.
Sure, he's getting older. By the time he goes back, I think when I'm 80 and God says, go lead the people of Israel out of Egypt, I'd be saying what Moses, go find someone else. Certainly he's getting older, which gives us a sense, I think, that his life is passing him by. He starts out thinking of himself as a deliverer. I'm going to deliver my people. I'm going to help them. And yet he's failed in that. And now he's in exile. And the move psychologically, think about the psychological impact of the move from all the privileges and power and prestige and opportunity of the palace in Egypt to a shepherd spending his days with sheep alone in a desert. And in his mind, that's it. This is what his life is going to be, right? He's done. The opportunity that he had has passed him by. He failed. And now he's going to live out his days as an alien, a stranger in a strange land. So, one of the things I think it's important for us to understand is that, of course, Moses is foreshadowing Israel, right? They're also going to spend 40 years in the desert, alienated in their minds from their home. What was their home? Egypt. Egypt was Moses' home. Egypt was Israel's home. And both of them spend 40 years in the desert, alienated from home. And of course, looking even further down the road, we see Jesus, right? Jesus spends 40 days in the desert, right? As part of his preparation. And of course, this is also preparation. And it's preparation for Israel too. Their 40 years is preparation for them to go into the land and to live as God's people in the promised land. But at the time that it's happening, preparation doesn't always feel like preparation, does it? Sometimes it feels like failure and loss and judgment. And so there is a pattern here that I think is good for us also to remember. Yeah, good.
I'm just going to say, these are examples of the fact that God's time frame is not our time frame.
Sure.
And this was true for Moses. He was thinking he was going to happen, and it didn't happen.
Right.
But he, obviously never gave up, and eventually God said, "This is my time frame. Now's the time."
Yeah.
And we got to realize that's the case for us too. That
Yeah.
we don't always get God's plans, displayed for us and view things when we want to do them.
Yeah. I actually think Moses did give up. I don't think God gave up, but Moses gave up. Because we'll see in the next chapter, as we go into chapter 3 and 4, that the Moses that God is having a conversation with in chapter 3 is a very different Moses than the Moses who stood up for his people in Egypt and who acted with confidence and courage to save the women from the shepherds. He is a beaten down, broken man who has no sense of his ability to do what God is asking him to do. Right? He's been broken by this experience. Yeah.
In my Bible has the map how Moses went back to Pharaoh and Midian, and that the road is exactly how Egyptian from Ramsey all the way down, each step is the same road. So he's familiar with that. In that 40 years, he's familiar with the whole area.
Right.
How can he lead Israel out from Egypt?
Good. So there's two parts to what's happening here. There is Moses' sense of loss, and there is God's purpose to prepare him. Two things are happening at the same time, right? And it's a good lesson for us, I think, because deliverance inherently comes with loss. Think about that. Deliverance is accompanied with loss. Moses has been delivered from Egypt. He is now free of Egypt, but he perceives it as loss. Israel is delivered from Egypt, and they perceive it as loss. Turn to Genesis chapter 4. I think we went through this in the introduction, and we'll briefly go through it today. Genesis 4 and verse 16. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Why on earth would I take you to that passage?
Because he was in a strange land.
Okay. What does anyone remember, because I've talked about it with some frequency through the years, what does the name Nod mean? Wandering. So Cain, notice what the verse says. He leaves the presence of the Lord and he settles in a land of wandering. So, what is the presence of the Lord? Where's my black marker? God's presence equals home, right? That's our true home. That's what we were created for. That is the home that ultimately Revelation 21 tells us that we have. Now, your dwelling, your home will be with God. I will be your God, and you will be my people, and I will dwell with you, and I will wipe your tears from your eyes, etc., etc. This is home. But when we leave home, Cain left the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod. And now this is his home, right? This is home for Cain. And for all of us as human beings, we make our home we try to make our home in the land of wandering. And so what is Nod? For Moses, it's Egypt. The land of slavery, the land of oppression, the land of wandering. But it's home. And in order for Moses to be delivered, he has to leave home. And so what does God say to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12? Leave your home and go to the place where I will show you. And when you're gone, when you've left home, what is this? A place of exile. I have no home. Remember what the Passover Seder, that line in the Passover Seder where we're supposed to recite, the Jews are supposed to recite, my father was a wandering Aramaean. Right? Moses becomes a wanderer. Because even though this is the true place of wandering, he thinks it's home. So now he's left home, and the desert is a place of wandering for him, a place of exile, a place of alienation. He has no home now. But what God is actually doing is bringing him home, right? He is bringing him back here. And so for us as the people of God, in order to go home, we have to leave home. We have to leave the home that we have tried to make in the land of wandering. And we have to become, as aliens, without a home, living as pilgrims in this place, that it doesn't feel like home anymore. And there are times when we long to go back to Egypt. It was easier then. But God is calling us forward. Can you see how the writer to the Hebrews addresses this? We don't have time to turn to it, but the writer to the Hebrews in chapter 11 brings this up on 3 different occasions in that single chapter. And he says they were all, the fact that they left means that they realized that was not their home. And so they were all looking for a better country. A country that is not made, a city not made with human hands. A country that God would show them, just like he promised Abraham. We are strangers in a strange land. And the road of faith is a road that takes us away from what we thought was home, but was actually the land of wandering, the land of oppression, the land of slavery. But it still feels like loss. Just like it did for Moses, and just like it did for the people of Israel, who were constantly saying, take us back to Egypt. Right? So that's the first part. The second part is that as Moses is in this land that he perceives to be an alien land, God is preparing him. What are some of the ways that God is preparing him? Grace mentioned one, right? He is learning the desert of Sinai like the back of his hand. Yeah.
Teaching him patience.
Yeah, he's obviously 40 years teaching him patience, preparing him in that way. I find it interesting also that he spends 40 years as a shepherd, because he's going to spend the next 40 years herding people, right? Which is a lot harder, a lot more difficult, as difficult as sheep can be, right? Shepherding people, he is being prepared for that. And I think that there's also, and this is something that's important for us to recognize as well, that there is preparation that God is doing in Moses' brokenness. Because Moses arrives in chapter 3 a broken man. He doesn't have confidence in what he can do. It's gone, it's lost. And that's exactly where God wants him, so that he will recognize that his strength is in the Lord. What's that expression? God can't use a man greatly until he wounds him deeply, right? That ultimately it is through this experience that Moses can become the man that God intended him to be, because now he's not acting in his own strength, but he's going to be acting in the strength of the Lord and recognizing his inability and his dependence on God. And so, in those desolate places, I know some of you live in the desert right now, and it feels like exile. God is working. God has a purpose, and he is not only bringing you home, but he is preparing you. And you can't know it. We can't see it in the desert, right? And there are times when it feels like life has passed me by. I made so many mistakes, I have so many regrets, or whatever it is that the accuser wants to tell us, right, that says you're useless. God is preparing. God is still at work. His covenant he's not forgotten his covenant. He is bringing you to a place where you may never see it. Sometimes people die without seeing it. I love what the writer to the Hebrews says, right? All these died, still not seeing. And yet, the tremendous hope that is there for all that God is doing and will do in you and me in the desert. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the way that it speaks to our hearts and shows us ourselves and speaks to the challenges that we face as strangers in a strange land. Help us to learn from Moses' own sense of desolation, that in those desolate places that we find ourselves in, you are there with us, and you are accomplishing your purpose, and you will bring us home. Thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.